We're pleased to welcome you to the AUSA Noon Report, our virtual series featuring senior Army leaders, providing important updates on key defense topics. Our host today is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Association of the United States Army, General Carter Ham.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Association of the United States Army's Noon Report. We're really glad that you've joined us today and really appreciate your continued support for AUSA's programs, but also your continued support for America's Army. It's a good day to be a soldier for life. A special welcome today to Brigadier General retired Clara Adams Ender, a groundbreaking leader in Army medicine, a longtime supporter of AUSA and an AUSA member, and a tremendous soldier for our life. General Adams Ender, we're glad that you have joined us today. And I'd especially like to welcome and thank our sponsor for today's event, Fluor. Fluor is a global publicly traded professional and technical solutions provider. They've been a national partner at AUSA for 13 years, and we appreciate Lieutenant General retired Mick Bednarik from Fluor joining us today. So Fluor, thanks very much. We cannot do these events without you. We're here today at today's Noon Report to talk about Army medicine with the Army medicine's two most senior leaders. Army medicine, of course, has an essential key role in building readiness for today's Army, but Army medicine is also one of the most highly valued benefits of military service, especially valuable to soldiers, families, and retirees. And so we look forward to hearing more about today's Army medicine from our guests today. Welcoming the Surgeon General, the 45th Surgeon General of the United States Army, Lieutenant General Scott Dingle. He is, prior to serving as Surgeon General, he was the Deputy Surgeon General and Deputy Commanding General for Support at United States Army Medical Command. He is a distinguished military graduate of Morgan State University. His degrees include a Master of Science from Central Michigan University, Master of Military Arts and Science from the School of Advanced Military Studies, and a Master of Science in National Security Strategy from the National War College. He's commanded the 30th Medical Brigade in Europe, the Medical Recruiting Brigade. He has lots of time at Fort Bragg. I was disappointed, though, General Dingle, to find, as closely as I scrutinized your bio, no time with the 1st Infantry Division, and that's really disappointing. Maybe we can remedy that as we go forward. General Dingle's right-hand man, right-hand lead, most senior enlisted leader, Command Sergeant Major Diamond Hough. Sergeant Major Hough is the Command Sergeant Major for United States Army Medical Command, and he has served in all of the tough and key leadership positions that you would expect of someone at that level. He's been a Command Sergeant Major, he's been an Operations Sergeant Major, he's been First Sergeant, Detachment Sergeant, he's been an Observer Controller, a Ward Master. It's about every hard job one might pick in Army medicine. Command Sergeant Major Hough has held that position. He earned a master's degree in leadership studies from the University of Texas at El Paso. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Chaminade University in Honolulu, and he has military education includes every course from the primary leadership development course through the Sergeant's Major Academy. And in almost every course, he has been recognized as either a distinguished or honor graduate or otherwise recognized for excellence. You can see their full biographies on the screen that you have before you. Just click on that on the upper right-hand side if you'd like to view their complete biographies. We'll have a quick conversation amongst the three of us. But if you'd like to have your questions asked of General Dingle or Sergeant Major Hough, use the Q&A tab and post your question in the box at the lower right-hand side of your screen. We'll get to as many of your questions as time will allow, and we certainly look forward to those questions from the audience. Well, let's dive right into it. We are now more than a year into COVID across the nation, and the Army has been dealing with this from the very start. And General Dingle, I'll come back to you in just a moment and ask you more broadly the role that Army medicine has played in combating COVID. But Sergeant Major, if you could take on a contemporary issue, there's been a lot of talk recently things published in the media about, are soldiers accepting of the COVID vaccine? Are they resisting the COVID vaccine? What are you seeing?
So great question. And I'll tell you, those numbers are rising. And so first, let me acknowledge the fact that I understand our soldiers' concerns. As I travel and I engage our soldiers, it's usually come back to three different things. And they fall under whether their family history of being hesitant to vaccines, whether the misinformation they're getting off the internet and different websites. And also some of them are concerned with the history of vaccines in our country. So I like to acknowledge that first. Second, what I've found to be very helpful is when we as leaders engage all the way down to the lowest level. When our soldiers know better, they do better. When we give them facts, they do better. When we tell them where to go look to find the information, they do better. And what I've seen is as I've engaged them and talked to them and clarified some of their questions at the lowest level, we've had good results. And that's why I think we see an uptick on the soldiers' vaccines.
Oh, that is really good news. And I'm assuming that uptick, does that apply across the total Army, active guard and reserve?
Absolutely. So as I talk to my Compo 2 and 3 brother and sister in, absolutely the same thing is happening. Engaged leadership and clarifying and coming to a good understanding of what's happening with the vaccine, how the vaccine was created, the strength of the vaccine, then yes, they're getting better results.
Pretty amazing. It seems like, every tough issue that the Army ever faces, at the end, it always boils down to leadership, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's pretty amazing. So, General Dingle, if you could talk to us a little bit about more comprehensively, what's the Army doing these days? We obviously saw the Army very heavily engaged in the early stages of combating COVID. Where's the Army today, and what are the challenges in combating COVID that you see in the force, and then more broadly in your support to civilian authorities across the nation?
General Ham, thank you for that question. It was almost a year ago to date that we were in a mode of force health protection, and that is always where the Army is going to be in that space. We went from force health protection to reacting to this thing called COVID-19, deploying our deployable units, our hospitals to locations as required, New York City, Washington State. From there, the call for the Army's help continued to come, and the Army responded. Not just with the leadership, the research and development, the testing capability, the planning effort at Health and Human Services, in the Department of Defense COVID Task Force, with the entire research effort. And so as we went from testing a year ago, the Army now finds itself today continue to adapt to the needs of the nation. So as we continue to support the federal vaccine effort for our nation, you see what's called the Vaccine Task Force supporting the country. States, we have vaccine teams, just like initially our urban augmentation medical task force teams were augmenting our hospitals. As we start to redeploy our urban augmentation medical task force, which we're embedding in the hospitals to augment hospitals, our vaccination teams we see deploying around the country to help the various states, towns, and cities to administer vaccines in accordance with the national vaccine effort. In addition to that, the Army is still concerned with force health protection because the Army still is training, even though we are ready and responsive to the needs of our nation. At the same time, the force health protection piece of the vaccines that Command Sergeant Major talked about to protect the force, but the Army is also training. We're still training, and the Army has to be ready to deploy today, fight tonight, and Army medicine is staying on top of the scene so that the medic can return them to duty tomorrow when need be. So we're very involved across the nation in the entire Department of Defense, augmented with the subject matter experts, with testing, with vaccinations, with the research development, the medical countermeasures, and we continue to do the assessments from a public health perspective to ensure that our forces, when we continue to train and get back to executing, that they're protected in this new environment.
Yeah, it's been truly an amazing and comprehensive effort. Sergeant Major, you've seen thousands of soldiers, again, from all three components deployed over the past year to combat COVID. What are you hearing from them? What's their sense of the mission that's been asked of them?
Yeah, so excitement, to be honest. Our soldiers feel absolutely privileged and honored to be able to support our nation. And as they deploy, they find excitement and joy in that. Now, does that come with some stress, being away from family, being in isolated locations? Absolutely. But we still remain one of the most resilient companies, organizations, enterprises in America. And our soldiers, they actually are happy to be able to perform the mission, especially our medical soldiers. So you think about COVID, you think about different enemies. COVID is an enemy that's almost designed for Army medicine to be in the lead, to be able to deal with. And our soldiers are happy to be able to do our part in defeating this enemy. So I find that our soldiers, all things considered, are excited about being out front, leading our nation, supporting our nation.
I think anyone who is called to military service already has a pretty strong ethos of selfless service, but it seems especially poignant within the medical field, that not only to serve in the military, but to serve others through military medicine is pretty remarkable.
Absolutely. Honored and
Absolutely,
privileged.
yes.
Yeah. Joe Dingle, I think the goal has been set to say they get 80% of the force vaccinated by Independence Day, by the 4th of July.
Yes, sir.
How's that coming? And are you going to make it?
We are on a full court press to get there. One thing that is going to allow us to meet that goal is that the distribution of the vaccine has increased. And so initially it was a supply and demand issue. We didn't have the supplies to vaccinate the numbers that we really wanted to. Now that the federal vaccine movement is producing more and distributing more, our numbers are constantly going up. So we're on a full court press to get to that number.
And how about Army families?
Absolutely, in accordance with the president's, April 19th. So we're looking at the opening up all of the 73 medical treatment facilities that are conducting vaccinations to our schema level 2 member of beneficiaries also, which means our family members. So we are there. We're excited. Some are already doing family members now because they're further along the schematic of vaccination to family members. And we're excited because the family members are happy, because when we talk about protecting the force, it's not just the soldiers, but it is the family members and the beneficiaries. So we're excited, and the medics and the civilians and the medical workers are doing a phenomenal job in getting to that number.
Yeah, that it really is a remarkable effort. There are some complexities with both soldiers and particularly with family
Yes.
members stationed overseas. How are you dealing with that?
Doing very well, very well. Initially, there was concern because we had to work through the distribution constraints. And so, being that the vaccines were not there, we were just working within the 1A, 1B, 1C, those deployed forces, those operational forces that are at the top of the scheme. Now that the vaccines have increased, that is what is allowing us to get to our family members overseas. And our overseas medics and medical personnel are doing a phenomenal job getting the family members into the medical treatment facilities and getting them vaccinated.
Yeah. So I was gonna take us away from COVID, but I'm gonna deviate from protocol here a little bit. And I see we have an audience question, and you'll look at that question and you'll see who that's from. Clara A. Oh, I think we know exactly who that is, General Adam Zender. And her question is, what's happening to the Army in the Army to develop its own vaccine?
Well, there's one effort. And so, one thing that I am extremely proud of is that from the very start of the vaccine medical countermeasure development, the medical research, the Army was there the whole time. You may not have seen it on the television or on the screens out front, but the Medical Research Development Command has partnered with the Presidential COVID Task Force, which was developing the vaccines. And so it was our medical research developers who were partnered with not just the Presidential Task Force, but with academia as well as the industry, all working as a partnership consortium. And so the vaccines are continuing to be supported in a unified effort across the entire nation, or the whole of government approach, or Department of Defense. So it won't be a sole vaccine or Army vaccine per se, or any medical countermeasure, but it's really the entire industry and academia, because we're all partnered together.
Yeah, we've seen sometimes over the past year, General Mike Talley and his crew of
Yes.
really big brain people, fully engaged in that effort. So that certainly is reassuring. So let's shift gears now, and as you've taught me, we'll do a pivot to readiness. All right, Army medicine is changing. All right, there's structural changes, there are legal changes, there's all the rest of that, but fundamentally, there's a shift in your focus across the command. And John Dingle, if you could talk about what does that pivot to readiness mean for you? And then Sergeant Major, well, if I could ask you then, what does that mean for non-commissioned officers and soldiers in terms of their training, their preparation, their professional development?
Thank you, General Ham. That pivot to readiness means we are focusing on our mission. You know, the Army's mission, as you know, is to deploy, fight, and win wars wherever they were called upon. And then Army medicine has to be there because when wars start to happen, the first cry that happens on the battlefield when someone is injured is medic. And when that medic is called upon, it is imperative, non-negotiable, that Army medicine is there to conserve the fighting strength. And so what has happened through law, through the NDAA, is that it has allowed Army medicine to be what I call the 5 R's. First is ready, ready to deploy, fight, and win and conserve the fighting strength. The second one is reorganize. We are reorganizing in accordance with the law, NDAA. That reorganization effort has allowed us to split the healthcare delivery focus of Army medicine in the past of that responsibility and given that to the Defense Health Agency, which will have the authority and direction and control, oversight, and standardization of healthcare delivery. And it allows us to pivot to readiness. And that readiness pivot means that we are focusing on the individual critical task list of every operational AOC so that when soldiers deploy to execute their missions, they are combat ready to conserve the fighting strength. That pivot to readiness also means that regardless of what the call is, and Command Sergeant Major mentioned earlier, whether if it was right here, COVID-19 in our country, or in a deployed area overseas somewhere, that medic, that medical professional, that medical team, that medical unit will be able to execute its mission flawlessly to conserve that fighting strength. So the 5 R's is ready, reorganize, ready, reformed, reorganized, responsive, and relevant. That pivot to readiness means that we will be there wherever the Army is. As the Army modernizes, we're modernizing because we want to be there to conserve that fighting strength. That's that pivot to readiness. And then the ICTL piece, I'll let Command Sergeant Major expound upon. The ICTLs is the individual critical task list. That means, again, every soldier, whether officer or enlisted, with an operational specialty, has to be able to perform his or her task while in combat. Command Sergeant Major?
Yes, thank you, sir. So for me, the way I operationalize the boss's 5 R's are simple. We have to keep up with the force we support. And so what does that mean? That means increased survivability, depending on whatever domain we're fighting in, and then to have the skill set to do our job that the Army requires us to do. So I speak in terms of warrior tasks and battle drills and then ICTLs. And what I like to say to our soldiers all the time, it doesn't matter how good you are at your MOS. If I can't get to the top of the hill where the soldiers are I need to save, then I'm not effective. And if I get to that top of that hill fast, but I don't know my craft, I'm ineffective. So it's not an or, it's an and. So we are committed in the non-commissioned realm to make sure our soldiers are trained and ready to perform the mission. The cornerstone of what an enlisted soldier does is train and lead and develop their soldiers for whatever environment and whatever contingency or fight we have to put ourselves in. So to stay focused on that, to be able to actualize and operationalize the 5 R's is what we do.
So, Sergeant Major, the environment in which soldiers are going to operate is changing. And certainly as the Army and the Joint Force focuses on multi-domain operations, major combat operations, or a refocus in that area, as compared to where we have been for the past 20 plus years in counterinsurgency types of operations. That's a very different environment than most non-commissioned officers who have led the Army over the past 20 years. very different than the environment in which they're operating. What does that changing environment cause you to do differently in the training and professional development of soldiers and non-commissioned officers?
Yes, great question. So shoot, move, communicate, and medicate. And so I'll focus real quick on medicate. So if you look at the environment that we're anticipating we'll find ourselves in, one that's denied all areas of access, we have to be able to hold a patient on the X or at the point of injury a lot longer. And we describe that as prolonged field care. I will tell you right now, in partnership with our MedCONE and TRADOC, we are currently changing our POI to be able to support that and close that gap. And then Army Medicine has a bunch of different platforms that we're going to use and have access to for our soldiers to make sure they are ready to be able to operate in that environment and continue to conserve the fighting strength.
It's a tall order.
Absolutely.
In a very, very difficult environment. General Dingle, one of the things that's changed, and you and I spoke about this briefly before, is the direction over the past 20 years has been that service members in operational areas must be within the so-called golden hour, 1 hour of an aero medevac ambulance. So if they are wounded or injured, that an aero medevac can occur within 1 hour. It seems to me that in the postulated operating environment of major combat operations, that has to change somehow. What do you think about? How do you think about that now, and the treatment of casualties, perhaps not inside that golden hour, but also potentially in greater numbers than we have seen in the past 20 plus years?
No, sir, General Ham, that's a great point. I was sitting here reflecting as Command Sergeant Major was talking about the prolonged field care, and it's a shift. You're absolutely right. It is a shift from how we fought wars the last 15, 20 years. And as we look towards tomorrow's environment and large scale combat operations in the MDB environment, it's going to require that unit, not just the first responder, the combat medic, which is very important and key to sustainment of life in combat, which we cannot forget. But it's going to be everything from that point of injury all the way back to the fixed facility. I say from the foxhole to the fixed facility, one continuum that is able to execute prolonged care. We started years ago, almost 10 years ago, under General Hough, where Army medicine started blurring the lines of operational medicine. We wanted to focus on the corps. We wanted to focus on the divisions to ensure that Army medicine was there. And then under General West, we pivoted to expeditionary medicine, austere environments, elongated evacuation channels. And so now with a full pivot to readiness, and as the Army modernizes and we start getting into the multi-domain battle of those extended distances, it's going to be that much more important that our teams are prepared to hold casualties longer, that our trauma surgeons, which we are increasing in our Army Ready Surgical Task Force, the number of FRSDs to be employed and to sustain and hold.
FRSD.
Forward resuscitated surgical detachments, formerly known as our FRSDs.
I'm probably the only person who didn't know that, but
so those surgical detachments, forward on the battlefield, and as we deploy more, they're going to be out there in austere environments. We're going to have to hold longer. The evacuation could be overwhelmed, where that expeditionary medicine and the ability for the combat medics and those providers to sustain prolonged field care was the key word that Command Sergeant Major mentioned. So we're shifting back to that. So the national training centers and all of our training centers are going to be very key in refining and retuning our medical units back to the basics of conserving the fighting strength.
Very difficult in this
Yes,
in the
it is.
envisioned operating environment, to be sure. Sergeant Major, one of the other tasks that falls to you, flowing from the National Defense Strategy and reliance on allies and partners, it gets into the realm of security force assistance. The Army, of course, has stood up the security force assistance brigades. There's a medical component to that of helping develop medical capabilities with allies and partners. How's Army Medical Command involved in that process?
Well, so we have partnerships globally, and if we're talking about the SVABs, then of course we have our embedded medical experts within the SVABs. So as the SVABs go out to execute their mission, we do have that component there to be able to teach our partner nations what I like to call casualty response, because that's really what we're talking about. How do we have a global casualty response when it happens? And so whether it's our MTF commanders, whether it's our command sergeant majors in our different divisions or in our ASCCs that have those different relationships and partnerships throughout the globe, they are the ones we lean on to be our experts in integrating Army medicine into whatever we do. And so far it's working. As I travel, I make sure that depending on what camp, post, and station or AOR I am, I speak with those senior leaders to make sure they understand that Army medicine is here to respond.
I think that the Army's commitment to casualty treatment, to prevention, is one of those things that really sets the American Army apart from others. And I think many of our partner nations, particularly in developing countries, are really astounded at the level of effort that our Army places on the medical care of our soldiers. But when they see that, and you get to recognize, why do we do that, as an underpinning confidence builder to soldiers, that you will be well cared for prior to battle, and unfortunately, if you are wounded, that care is going to be world class. And that's really a different mindset that I think helps very much in the security force assistance world.
John Hamm, if I may just add to that, you're absolutely right. And I like to call it leveraging the medical instrument of power, because it breaks down walls. Our National Guard Compo 2 State Partnership Program, which continue to build alliances with nations around the world. And one thing that we're doing within the Army medicine strategy in support of the Army is weaving that medical instrument of power to build those partnerships, to help other nations conserve their strength by the partnership programs. And it is a tremendous effort that is going on, that we are synchronizing now, that again, to support the Army's mission and building partnerships and those alliances. So if called upon, we are ready as a joint unified multinational force.
Yeah, we've seen that in practice a couple of times.
Yes, sir.
That's pretty amazing. So you mentioned again, the total Army, so Army National Guard and Army Reserve, and a question from the audience about, how do you assess the medical readiness of the reserve components of the Army?
They're doing very well. We monitor, as you know, the individual medical readiness of all the compos. Compos 2 and 3 are often leading the Compo 1, the active duty versus National Guard and reserves. However, we count it all together. In today's Army, I am extremely proud of where we have come as a total force. 32 years ago, when the onset of many efforts and training initiatives, I believe that there was a little disparity, because the focus wasn't on the Compo 3 side, in which the largest part of 70% of our medical force is there. Desert Storm and Afghanistan, Iraq, those opened up the opportunity for our Reserve and National Guard forces to increase their readiness. And so now, when you see the units deploy, you can't tell if it's a active duty unit from a National Guard or a Reserve medical unit, because those medical professionals, those doctors, those nurses, those dentists, that medic is ready to conserve the fighting strength, and they're coming combat ready. And I'm extremely proud of how, again, we've blurred that line of separation, and that we are all trained to one band of excellence. And even as we get into programs, we talk about the pivot to readiness of mil to civ training, and our enlisted medics also in SMART programs. And I'm sure Sergeant Majors want to pile on to that, but it's not just focusing on the active duty proficiency and acuity. I want to make sure that everyone, whether active duty, National Guard, or reserves, has the opportunity and trained to execute their jobs flawlessly. Command Sergeant Major.
Yeah, so integrated everywhere. So even in our own headquarters, we have Compo 2 and 3. And as you know, sir, that brings the team together and levels the bubbles on understanding. And then you have major events. So in the Army a long time ago, our CTCs were great opportunities for us to learn how to fight. And a lot of times I didn't see our Compo 2 and 3 brother and sister in. Nowadays, that's all changed. They're integrated all the way through. And then they even have platforms like Global Medic, which is a large platform where our reservists and also our active duty perform our medical mission in a field environment. And opportunities like that have actually increased the way we do business as a full compo medical command. And watching the way it was and to where it is now, light years ahead, just like the boss said.
And I think it starts with me. It starts with me with the leader development of the Compo 2-3 general officers, Army medicine leaders, as well as engaging their units, which again, we have on our battle rhythm. When we battlefield circulate, it's not just to the active duty, the MedCom and our operational forces, but it's to the Compo 2 and 3 units also. And so we've closed that gap, and I'm extremely proud of how they're performing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people probably don't recognize that such a large percentage of the Army's medical capabilities do reside in the reserve components, particularly in the Army Reserve. But to your point, I'm just looking at your name tag. It doesn't say active Army, it doesn't say Army National Guard, doesn't say Army Reserve. It says U.S. Army. Yeah, and that takes that total Army solution to these complex problems. So a related question to that from Keith, because so many of the reserve component Army medical soldiers also work in the health services industries and businesses in their civilian careers. What are things that the civilian medical systems can learn from the military, and what can the Army learn from civilian medical systems to help improve both?
I think it is really a total healthcare perspective, whether treatment, whether processes, whether systems. I think and the law talks about the mil to civ partnerships of what we do and what the civilian sector does. And I think that it's a duality, it's an exchange. As we learn the latest processes, systems, technologies, procedures, medical countermeasures, we get that from the industry, academia, and the civilian sector. Likewise, even just with the deployment of our Urban Augmentation Medical Task Force, those are a task force in which the Army developed to support the response of the overwhelming hospitalizations of COVID patients. And so we modeled that after the field medical stations, the Health and Human Services concept of deploying medical units to support towns and countries and or rather towns and cities. And then we modified that to augment our civilian hospitals. The overwhelming response that I get from the CEOs, the COOs, and all of the hospitals, the civilian hospitals, is thank you for the commitment and the dedication and the excellence that your medics are operating in. And so they're learning, a synergy, a teamwork that the Army instills, that when we deploy, fight, win as a team. And so even though it may be 5 soldiers that are embedded in a civilian hospital, that civilian hospital was forever impacted because they watched how the soldiers executed with a dedication and a commitment to sustain lives. And so it's been phenomenal. And that's the overwhelming response I've been getting back, because it has been an augmentation mission over the last 18 months or so in supporting and augmenting our civilian hospitals, but through just our partnerships. The latest and greatest medical countermeasures are shared, and our experts are benefiting in a tremendous manner from them.
Yeah, that increasing interaction between civilian and military medical capabilities can only help but benefit both. I think that's really good. Sergeant Major, the boss talked a bit about the treatment facilities now falling under the purview of the Defense Health Agency, but they'll still be populated by service members. So how do you a question again from the audience, how do you make sure that the Army medical personnel who are serving in the MTFs under DHA control, how do you make sure that that their readiness is maintained?
Great questions. But I'll tell you, for me, it's an easy one. We sit in the same building with the DHA leadership, have constant conversations with them. And here are some things that's important to remember. The DHA is made up of us, right? Our sister services, us. So they're as committed to our readiness as we are. So while their mission may be healthcare delivery, they understand that our soldiers belong to their services and will remain ready to support our nation when called upon, period. So I don't think it'll be as challenging as some may think for us to be able to maintain our readiness. We will use those platforms to make sure we take care of our soldiers, their families, the beneficiaries, and also to maintain our clinical currency as a force. So I don't think that'll change at all.
And it is, I think it's still fair to say that it is in the MTFs where medical professionals maintain and build their technical capabilities for the large part. And the combat skills have to come from the Army. Here's an interesting question from Lauren that I'd like both of you to comment on. Given the behavioral health crisis, which has perhaps been exacerbated by COVID-19, what is the Army doing to address these behavioral health issues and improve resiliency? And I'd say a part of that certainly relates to the Army's efforts to combat soldier suicide. So General Dingle first, maybe, and then Sergeant Major.
Yeah, and I'll start, and it starts with leadership. And so we have tremendous leadership in the United States Army, from the Secretary and Chief of Staff of the Army all the way out to all of the 4-star commands down to the lowest company, platoon, squad, section, team. And with that leadership, first engaging the environment and knowing the soldiers. There's many different programs that we are working from quality of life, and this is my squad. And, these programs are designed to get after the very DNA that keeps us together, which is the organizational construct of the Army and knowing our teammates. And that is the first step as we work towards combating suicides and the mental health challenges, even in the COVID environment. I'll let Command Sergeant Major expound on it. This is my squad, but it's about knowing our soldiers, about knowing each other, so that we can engage and be difference makers in the lives of our fellow teammates, and not just walk by, not unconnected, where we should have intervened because we should have known. From the medical perspective, we've also partnered with the chaplain. We've also partnered with the resiliency, the suicide prevention task force. And we have this entire Army approach, in teaching and educating, but also if it comes to where it's after or in the process, we're responding in a tremendous manner. But as you know, if the attempt was made, we're already too late. We want to get ahead of the boom. So we're attacking the culture from an Army leadership perspective with various programs. And then even from, as the Commanding General of the United States Army Medical Command, my concern, in which I'm doing a mental health behavioral assessment on, is on the medical providers. Because even as we look at the suicides, we cannot forget that the healthcare field, has been under tremendous amount of stress of trying to save lives. The COVID hospitals are overwhelmed. We've been deploying our medical professionals from our military treatment facilities to civilian facilities. And as I talk to them, the amount of dedication is paramount, evident, but also the amount of stress, because they're dealing with death, at numbers that they have not dealt with as they're dealing with on these wards. And they're perfectionists. Every healthcare perfectionist is a professional, is a recovering perfectionist, because they love to take care of people, which makes Army medicine so great and medicine so great. But that commitment to others, they often put themselves on the back burner. And so my concern is I have my finger on the pulse is also on the medical workforce, and ensuring that they're resilient, that the support that they need, the outlet, getting ahead before the stress overwhelms them. And so this is my squad. The Army medicine is my squad. And so we're trying to attack that. We are ensuring that we are undergirding them with the preventive measures in spite of the tremendous workload and stress that they are under, which is a leadership challenge, an issue and responsibility that we are implementing from the top to the bottom and constantly doing the assessments on.
So the issue of who cares for the caregiver
Yes.
is really a complex
Yes,
issue.
sir.
Have you been able to increase the number of behavioral health specialists across the Army?
We are, and that's a challenge because now it gets into the recruiting. And so there's always that challenge, having formerly been the medical recruiting brigade commander, of competing with the civilian sector, because the behavior health professionals are in high demand, especially today in this COVID environment. It exacerbated an already stressed status that people are living in. And so as we're competing with civilian sector, we have the authorizations. The health and holistic fitness aspect of things, the mental health professionals. The chief has directed us to increase those in the operational force. A few years ago, our operational leaders did a bottom-up assessment, and the main things that were coming up that they required was behavioral health, nutritious dietitians, physical therapists, and occupational therapists to help, again, conserve and take care of the soldiers. And so the chief is committed to that. He has mandated for me to increase the number. We are working on increasing the number, and it gets back to the recruiting effort from the enlisted as well as the officer side of the house.
Good, thanks. So I'm getting the high sign for the last question, but I'm going to cheat and I'm going to ask a couple of last questions. One I think is pretty straightforward, and that's a question from Peter that says, why isn't the Army just mandate COVID-19 vaccines?
Well, we have to follow the law, and we also have to follow the FDA process. And so once it gets through the FDA full approval process, at that point is when it could be mandated. And so we are anticipating that, hopefully by the end of this calendar year, that it will have FDA full approval so that the Department of Defense can direct it. So it's not an Army thing. We have to follow the department first and foremost in policy. But even before then, we are nested tightly with the CDC, and the FDA process approval.
No, it's a fair question, because I think a lot of us old soldiers say, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. I don't remember being given a choice.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It was getting this line. Okay, so now really no kidding. Last question, and Sergeant Major, we'll start with you, and then General Dingle, ask you to close out. But the same question for both of you. What's one future development in Army medicine that really gets you excited?
Oh, that's a great question. I hadn't thought about that, but I'll tell you, the training. So we are doing a lot of different things in Army medicine as directed by the boss to make sure that we stay relevant to the Army. And for me, that goes to training. So I would say, as we look at the different opportunities we have to increase the baseline knowledge of our enlisted medics and technicians, I'm extremely excited about where that's going, and be able to match a lot of the emerging technologies that's coming from our civilian task force, integrating that into the Army, and then leading through that to be able to exercise that. Extremely excited about that.
And I think some of the developments in programs such as synthetic training, and it can really enhance the training that you're talking about, that's necessary for soldiers and non-commissioned officers to increase not only their medical skills but their combat skills as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting time.
It is.
Okay, General Dingle, close us out.
And it all falls under modernization and Army Futures Command. And I'm excited because in those 8 cross-functional teams, I have a medical subject matter expert in every last one of those embedded. Because as I tell the chief and I tell General Murray and Army Futures Command that, as the Army modernizes, Army medicine will not be left behind. And so I want that same future vertical lift capability, so that in those extended lines of evacuation, I can get there, we can get them out and medevac them out with the same capability. And then with all of the latest surgical capabilities and things that we're working on under Army Futures Command implemented at each level, from the foxhole along that medical evacuation continuum back till they get out of theater. So modernization as a whole, because we are fully nested and embedded in Army Futures Command. I'm excited about the many things that all of the cross-functional teams are doing. But like I tell every last one of the subject matter experts, okay, we're not going to get left behind. You know, we got to stay with the force so that we can save the force. So when they do cry out that word medic, Army medicine is right there, modernized, reorganized, and conserving the fighting strength.
Well, it is indeed an exciting time, I think, to be in Army medicine. So thank you both, not just for today, but for your many, many years of service to the nation, your leadership of Army medicine, and all that you do for soldiers, families, veterans, and retirees. We're really thankful that you've joined us today at AUSA. So I'd ask the audience to give a virtual round of applause to our great leaders. Mrs. Dingle, that's especially goes for you, though I know that you will offer General Dingle some criticism after, some constructive criticism after this event, as only spouses can do, to be sure. But thank you very much, both of you. So, ladies and gentlemen, a couple of previews of some upcoming events. April 20th, we have a Thought Leaders webinar with General Retired George Jowen on his latest book, Author or Watchman at the Gates, A Soldier's Journey from Berlin to Bosnia. Many of you know, and many of you know of General Jowen. We look forward to a great conversation with him on April 20th. On May 4th, we'll have a noon report with Lieutenant General Dan Karbler, Commanding General of the United States Space and Missile Defense Command and the Joint Functional Component Command for Integrated Missile Defense. And unless you've been asleep for the past couple of years, missile defense takes on an increasingly important role as part of multi-domain operations and the defense of the homeland. So we look forward on May 4th to meeting with General Karbler. And on May 6th, kind of a special treat, a little bit unusual for us, but we'll have a Thought Leaders seminar with Lieutenant General Chris Tickell, Deputy Chief of the British Army General Staff, and talk with us a bit about how the British Army is advancing and modernizing and preparing for the same environment that the United States Army is preparing for. And not too early to mark your calendars, October 11th through 13th, the AUSA annual meeting at the Walter E. Washington Convention Center in DC. Details still forthcoming. We're all grappling with the effects of COVID and what that means for future events. We're confident that we'll be in person October 11th through 13th. Look for more information at ausa.org. And again, a special shout out to Fluor, our sponsor for today's event. Thank you very much for your continued support for AUSA and for the Army, but especially for sponsoring today's Noon Report. And then finally, thank you to all of you who are AUSA members. And it surprises me to learn that some of you watching today are not AUSA members. I don't really understand that. So remedy that today, will you? Just go to ausa.org, sign up to be an AUSA member, and then we won't bother you anymore. Your membership really does matter. It is your membership that allows us to continue the programming and to continue the support for soldiers, Army civilians, and their families as we go forward. So thank you, all those who are members. We look forward to many of you joining us as members in the future. And so with that, again, special thanks to General Dingle and Command Sergeant Major Hough. Thank you for a great event today. And everyone else, please have a great Army Day. Thanks for joining us.